It's a very, very wise book. This guy knows his stuff, okay? That's why I asked him to come over here.
Thank you.
Dave, give me how this now is a quite successful company, necessarily was not successful when they started off because they didn't have their marketing mix fully realized, and that's Netflix. You gave an example of Netflix and how it began, and now we know they're making shows like CBS.
Right, yeah, right, they've seen a totally different market. One of the patterns, or the way that what I call big social mobile enterprises, regardless of the size of the company, but they think different about these digital initiatives. And Netflix is a good example. They had a very traditional rental service type a business model that wasn't really catching on. But then they started to do more work on the consumer behavior side of the house to understand the consumers better and better. And what they realized was that they could set aside that old traditional model of rent a movie, return a movie, rent another movie by creating this queue. And what that queue did is it really made Netflix a part of the consumers or their customers' life, right? They were now a collection device to say, I want to see that movie. Oh, my friend told me about that movie. I want to see that. I'm going to put that on my list. And that sounds innocuous when you say it that way. But from a business standpoint, what that allowed them to do was turn their inventory much more quickly. As soon as you watched the movie, sent it back, there was no waiting for you to come and rent again. It was automatically sent to you. So it really kind of revolutionized that industry as a byproduct. But it started with a much different approach. It started with an understanding of what is our business model and how can this initiative help us reinforce it, or what I like to call evolve into its next better state. Don't try to reinvent the world. Think of your business and how these things can bolster it and take it to the next level.
Okay, so I'm going to throw our business into this mix, okay? Because I feel we have been the original Netflix, okay? We, however, went to a medium, the web, 16 years ago. We'll be celebrating our 17th anniversary this year in July. So we saw the vision of the web. We said it looked like that monitor or the television coming out of the TV land. And I said, well, we'll just put our shows. We'll brand our positive, life-affirming content. We use the name Good News Broadcast, and because we want to emphasize that message, and that is our mission, to accentuate the positive in the world. And we started in our merry way here. We started doing shows. It was so early on that half of the shows had this thing called buffering. And so they'd be on for 12, 15 minutes, and 10 of those would be buffered. But now the technology got better, the bandwidth, the server space got less expensive. For years I didn't want anybody even to know us. They put me out of business because I'd have to pay so much on bandwidth by giving the video to somebody. So the whole business has changed. One area, though, that I'm interested in your thought here, and because ours is importantly a viewership, just like television, okay? We want to get this interview between you and me shared by 1 billion people, okay? So how do we get this interview with you and me shared by 1 billion people using new technology, as opposed to taking an ad out in the New York Times or setting up a booth at an event and say that, Good News interviewed David. How do we take the advantage of new technology?
Well, it really is good news, because if we went back just even 10 years or so, it wouldn't even have been possible. Right? So there really is a way for people to get a message out that they never could have before. And sometimes I'll do interviews on radio stations and I'll say, look, anyone can compete with you now, and they're really pushed off by that. But the upside of it, or the good news in that, is it's really much more value-based. And some people think it's good, some feel it's bad, but you can't really be a one-hit wonder as much anymore. You have to show consistent value over time. I mean, you look at your career, the length of your career, your ability to transition from traditional media into this new media, right? The thing that weaves them together is consistent quality. So that it has to be your core message. And you have to then communicate your core message through as many different venues as possible over and over and over. And what typically happens when organizations make this transition from what I would call the physical world into the digital world, launching via some of this newer technology, is they almost always fail. And one of the most interesting bits of research I got to do with the book was working with a company that manages all of the internet domains, goodnews.com or whatever it is, Giannetto.com. And what we found through this research was that it went entirely contrary to what happens in the physical world. In the physical world, about 10% of mature businesses go out of business every day or every year. About half of new businesses, small startups, go out of business every 3 years. In the digital world, across the digital landscape, the entire population of the internet turns over every 8 years. Now imagine that in the physical world. Here we are in Brooklyn, a very populated place. Imagine not one company that exists today is here 8 years from now. That's what happens in the digital landscape all the time. And the takeaway from that is that you can't go into this thinking that just because the cost of entry is very low, that you can set aside those things that are really core to your message. You actually have to understand them so much better. What is it that you bring to audiences that nobody else can? What's that value proposition? And then how do you stay on point with that and communicate it via as many different connectors as possible? And one of the differences is what we touched on earlier, those who can influence. So there are now a whole second tier of people who are influential, but they're not a broadcaster on CBS or PBS. They are people that have influence within a community. You have to get your message to connect to them and say, look, I bring something that would be of value to your community. How do we work together to share that? Because valuable content that helps people is rare. It's mostly fluff. It's mostly cat videos. It's mostly Happy St. Patrick's Day messages that these brands are delivering. If you can really condense a little bit, focus on your value, boil that down, and then do a better job of connecting yourself to groups that would find that interesting, you'll have far more success than just throwing things at a wall.
So with that in mind, and for the first actual 15 plus years, we were very focused. We were an advertising and marketing agency, okay, multicultural niche marketing. So our job was to help Sprint, IBM, big companies, reach the different ethnic communities. And when I would look at an ethnic community, whatever it was, the Irish community, I would say, well, hey, put a banner next to the St. Patrick's Day parade, or this Irish Cultural Association, or the Irish Echo, or whatever. I became a specialist, and I'm good at it. I know niche marketing, so I would find where is the community. Now we have this new technologies. We have the Facebooks, the Twitters, the Pinterests, the Tumblrs, the blah, blah, blah. We have all those. Then you have the big data that you probably can do research against and send out things. Where we used to do direct mail, now you can do it even on the web. And so how do we get started? How do we get started? How does a company who has maybe a lot of young people that sort of like grew up with this kind of information, and some of those senior execs that are trying to figure it out.
Yeah, there's so much in that question.
I'm
right?
sorry,
I'm
problematic in that way.
No, it's great. We could spend all day talking to the answer of just that question, because where we started was with a really clear understanding. You have to start with a really clear understanding that things have changed. The old pattern of marketing was much different than where it is at today. The traditional marketing approach that you still see through ad agencies, who are losing a bit of credibility with certainly younger generations today, is throw our message out there, broadcast it, hopefully do it effectively, tying into the interests of that group, putting next to St. Patrick's Day for the Irish, and hopefully we create an interesting enough message that at that moment of need they come back to us. That's the traditional approach. The approach today is understand my consumer and where they're at so well that I deliver them the right content or the right offer at exactly the moment of need. And that's a much different pattern. And you really have to focus in on specific opportunities instead of broadcasting. And this is challenging because, as you pointed out, you're typically hiring a younger generation of people to come in and run your social or your mobile or your big data initiatives. And then you have business executives that feel very removed from those people. And it's an age-old problem. The two groups can't talk to each other because the specialized practitioners don't understand the business model, and the executives don't understand the new initiatives to piece them together, right? And at the heart of the book is the method to bridge that gap. how do we talk about these digital initiatives in ways that reinforce very traditional business standards, right? And that's the example we saw with Netflix. Or if we use somebody like Comedy Central, that's a little bit more in line with what your organization does. They did a lot of analytical research to find out that younger generations are available to be turned into customers during holidays because they're stuck at dinner tables with family or old folks that who they're not really engaged with as much as the older generation might hope. They're on their phones, and while they're on their phones, they're susceptible to new content, right? So there's a very small window when they can be touched, and that's when they can be transferred.